This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm your host, Mac Pritchard. I'm also the founder of Mac's List. It's a job board in the Pacific Northwest that helps you find a fulfilling career. Every Wednesday, I talk to a different expert about the tools you need to get the work you want. Find Your Dream Job is brought to you by Top Resume. Top Resume has helped more than 400,000 professionals land more interviews and get hired faster. Get a free review of your resume today. Go to maxlist.org/topresume. You'll likely get a lot of advice when you look for work, and not every tip you get is a good one. How do you tell the difference between good and bad advice? Kamara Toffolo is here to talk about job search advice you need to ignore. Kamara is a resume writer, LinkedIn consultant, and job search strategist. She helps her clients dare to do work differently. She joins us from Ottawa, Ontario, in Canada. Well, Kamara, let's jump right into it. What do you mean exactly by job search advice you need to ignore, bad job search advice?
Great question, Mac. Well, there is just so much job search advice out there, and it's just very hard, as you said, to differentiate between what's good, what's bad, what's misleading, or what is actually accurate. And I'm noticing just a proliferation on the internet of really bad advice. And when we dig into it, we can see that a lot of this advice is coming from marketing and people trying to market certain services. And we can certainly get into that in more detail in a bit. But that's what I've been noticing. And so it's important for job seekers to really to scrutinize the information that's out there and use what works best for them.
I know we're going to talk about specific examples of advice you should ignore, but how do you in general distinguish between bad advice and legitimate disagreement?
Great question. So the bad advice often comes from, say, where I see it the most is coming from career coaches who may have not had any experience in hiring or who don't hang out with people who do hiring. That's where I get most of my information. Is I spend a lot of time engaging with recruiters and keeping on top of what is current in hiring. And so when people aren't doing that legwork, aren't doing that homework, sometimes they're depending on either old information or information that has started as a rumor or a marketing tactic. And so it's just very challenging for job seekers to distinguish between what's good, what's bad. But I would say that in order to do the best possible process in terms of eliminating what works and what doesn't, I would say to almost background check the people who are offering the advice and see if they have done hiring themselves, and if they have, at least their advice is rooted in that experience. And if they haven't done hiring, if they hang out a lot with hiring professionals, then their advice can be, it gives it more credibility when they are validating it through people who are in hiring.
In addition to hiring, are there other experiences that you think can add credibility and authority to advice that people should look at when they're looking at the background of the person who's offering the advice?
Certainly. So in my case, I don't come from I'll use me as an example. I don't come from a traditional hiring background. And so in my case, what I've done is in my resume writing career, I have actually apprenticed under other resume writers, established resume writers. And so that's how I really learned my craft rather than getting a certification. Not to knock certifications, but I felt that the real world application of resume writing, LinkedIn writing, and job search strategy is what gives me the credibility in what I do. And that's something that I would also favor as well in terms of whether I'm validating or verifying information that someone is offering or advice that someone is offering from a career perspective. Another way to, or other valuable experience would be something like if someone has already been in the role that a job seeker wants to target themselves, they can really speak from a great place of experience and offer some really sound advice that way as well. So those would probably be the two areas where I think experiences would really lend themselves well to giving good career and job search advice.
I want to get into the specific examples, but one last question. Why does this advice hang on year after year? Because some of the examples we're going to talk about, I've been hearing about for many years.
I think, well, yeah, we'll definitely get into the examples. And I think when we're thinking about the examples we're going to talk about, they hang on because they're easy stories. And they also almost relinquish or relieve job seekers from taking control of their job search. So there's external factors that they can blame using if they were to use this particular bad job search advice that we'll talk about later. But it relieves them of some element of accountability, which I can understand that they need or want, because job searching is tough. There's nothing easy about job searching, but what I want job seekers to know is that you are so much more in control than you think, and that by giving your control over to certain other factors, you are disempowering yourself in your job search. And that's why I really want to demystify some of the advice that's out there and debunk some of that bad job search advice as well.
All right, well, let's get to your list. Number one of your items of job search advice to ignore is to cram your application with keywords. What do you mean by this, Kamara, and why isn't this a good idea?
Yes, so there's a lot of talk about really using and prioritizing keywords in our resumes. So keywords being words that represent skills or strengths or responsibilities that we find in job postings. And so a lot of times we'll see resumes where the keywords are just stuffed into the resume with no sense of how these strengths or skills have actually been applied or demonstrated. And so the problem with keywords and why we don't want to rely on keywords exclusively is because it doesn't give the reader any context or idea of how you actually demonstrate and apply the strengths or skills that you're claiming via keywords. And so that's why we want to instead emphasize accomplishments, and that will give the reader an idea of how we have demonstrated our strengths and skills. And it also allows them to almost create a picture or a visual in their own minds of how you can step into the role that you're applying for and make a great difference, add value. And it gives the reader an idea of how you're qualified when you show that you've actually done the work already.
Was there a time when keyword cramming worked? How did this idea get started?
I think that it started with the emergence of the ATS, the applicant tracking system. And it was such a mystery to everyone. It's still somewhat of a mystery in some cases, but we know a lot more than we used to. And I think the idea of parsing, which is where the ATS can extract some information for record keeping from a resume, I think people ran with that concept and thought, well, if we insert a bunch of keywords, the parsing is really going to see that we have an abundance of them. And so that's going to make us rank higher in the system. But that's just not how the ATS really works. And that's certainly not how hiring works.
Well, number two on your list is to limit your resume to one page. And why is this advice wrong? Because I hear this a lot.
So it's not necessarily wrong for some job seekers. So job seekers that I would expect to see on a one page most likely would be really early professionals or recent grads. But the problem is that everybody believes that they should be on a one-page resume, or many people believe they should be on a one-page resume, which leads people with like 20 plus years of work experience trying to cram 20 years onto one page. And that just doesn't work. It doesn't make for a readable document. And it means that you are cutting a lot of important information. So we don't want that to happen. What we want to see is a resume being as long as it needs to be to tell your stories the right way, to show that you are qualified for the roles for which you're applying, for the roles that you're targeting. When we get into a rule about one-page resume, we're forcing this kind of convention universally, and that just doesn't work when we're dealing with human beings, right? And so we really want to allow ourselves to create a document that is easy to read and properly exhibits and properly shares our career stories. And the best way to do that is to use the space that you need and not feel confined to such a small amount of resume real estate.
Well, let's take a break. And when we come back, I do have a follow-up question about resume length. And I also want to get to the other items on your list as well. So stay with us. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Kamara Toffolo about job search advice you need to ignore. Do you need advice about your resume? Top Resumes help more than 400,000 professionals get more interviews and get hired faster. Go to maxlist.org/topresume. You get a free review of your resume by a professional writer. Go to maxlist.org/topresume. Find out how you can make your resume better. And you can also hire Top Resume to fix your resume for you. Go to maxlist.org/topresume. Now, let's get back to the show. We're back in the Max List studio. I'm talking with Kamara Toffolo. She's a resume writer, LinkedIn consultant, and job search strategist. She helps her clients dare to do work differently, and she joins us from Ottawa, Ontario, in Canada. Now, Kamara, before the break, we were talking about resume length, and I'm just thinking about the listener out there who's wondering, you need as much space as necessary to tell your story, but how do I figure that out? What if I'm on the fence? Do you have an easy tip for someone who's trying to sort that out?
Sure. So I have for my own resume writing practice, I have kind of general rules of thumb that I usually adhere to, but I am flexible depending on certain factors. But my general rule of thumb is if you have less than 5 years of work experience in your target profession, I would think that you would be on a one-page resume. Anyone beyond that with 5 or more years of work experience, I would expect to be on a 2-page resume, maybe on a 3-page resume as you're getting into more senior levels. And speaking of senior levels, someone who is at an executive level or senior leadership level, I would expect you to be on a 3-page resume, possibly even onto a 4-page resume.
That's very helpful. The third item on your list of job search advice to ignore is that you got to beat the applicant tracking system, which often goes by the acronym ATS. What do people mean when they say this, beating the ATS?
Well, I think this really goes back to our conversation around keywords. And I think the tactic of jamming keywords or stuffing your resume with keywords is something that some job seekers think is a tactic you can use to beat the ATS. And when we say beat the ATS, the concept is get past it. So get past this ATS, which is misperceived as a robot or artificial intelligence, to get your resume into the hands of a human. So I think that's generally what the concept of beat the ATS is.
And what kinds of things do you see job seekers do to try to do that, to get past the ATS?
So certainly we've got the keyword stuffing, and a variation of the keyword stuffing is something called the tiny white font trick. And this has seen a resurgence on TikTok because there was a viral TikTok video quite recently, actually, that was suggesting that job seekers copy and paste an entire job posting into the bottom or the third, another page on their resume in a super tiny font and make it white so it's invisible to the reader. Most people know that this is not going to be fully invisible. And also, this tactic doesn't work. It can be detected on the other side. And once that's seen by someone in hiring, they're just going to think that the job seeker was trying to manipulate the system, and they will question whether they're even qualified or not.
If you're not trying to trick the ATS, what is the better approach?
So the ATS is something that you want to be in. So I'm going to give credit to Amy Miller for this, and she really opened my eyes to the ATS and continues to do so. So she says the ATS is something you want to be in, and the reason that you want to be in the ATS is because you want to be in the files. You want to be in the system so that you can actually be hired. So the ATS is an important part of the kind of hiring ecosystem, so to speak. And so you want to be able to apply online, which will put your resume and put you as a job seeker, as an applicant into the ATS so that a recruiter can go in, read your resume, and then continue along with your file through the interviewing or hiring process. So it's important that you be in the ATS because that's how hiring happens. And that's how the people in hiring project manage your actual application.
What would you say to a listener who says, well, that sounds good, but I don't just want to be in an online filing cabinet. I want the recruiter to look at my resume and see what I can do for the company. Is there something I can do when preparing my application to make that happen?
Write a great resume. Make sure that your resume is emphasizing accomplishments as they relate to the serving the business needs of the company to which you're applying. So really have a good grasp on what solution you're providing, what value you're providing, what business problems you're solving, and make sure that your competence in that respect, as well as your strengths and your qualifications, are properly reflected in your actual resume. And that's what will make all the difference.
Number 4 on your list of job search advice to ignore is an idea that you either that applying online alone or networking by itself will get you a job. Tell us more about this.
So I think that job seekers see networking and applying online as two separate job searching strategies, when in actuality, there are two tactics in job searching that should coexist in a sound job search strategy. So oftentimes we'll see people just applying online and going for quantity of applications over quality, which isn't good. Or we'll see the flip side where job seekers are just networking. So sending out messages to people at the companies for which they want to work and leaving it at that. You need to do both. So applying online and networking are not mutually exclusive. They both need to happen, and they both need to happen at the same time. So if you are applying online for something, that's the time that you would want to see if you can follow up with someone internally. And in terms of networking, you would always want to be networking. So you want to be focused on, when it comes to networking, you want to be focused on building long-term relationships. So we don't want to just start networking when we're job searching. We want to be doing it all the time. But back to the applying online as one job search strategy versus networking in in kind of a siloed type of approach. We really want to merge those two concepts, because if you are networking with someone and you do get in touch with someone on the inside of a company, and you want to see if you can network your way into that company, you want to tell them that you've already actually applied to an open position, if there is one, online, so that they can easily refer to your open application.
If you are networking inside an organization, won't you hear through word of mouth alone that positions are opening up? Or do you also need to pay attention to websites and the online postings?
I think that you definitely need to keep your thumb on the pulse using job search postings. Certainly, if you have a good relationship with someone on the inside of your target companies, who is also tapped into the hiring process, or tapped into what's coming or opening up, I should say, then that's great as well. But I would not rely on someone getting in touch with me to tell me that there's an open role. More so, I would make sure that I am keeping track of what's coming onto job boards, and then also making sure that I'm keeping my relationships warm and engaged, and then asking my contacts in my network specifically if they have seen any particular roles, or if they're aware of any particular roles that I'm targeting that may be opening up shortly.
Many people are uncomfortable with networking, and that may be the reason why they focus on applying online alone. What do you say to someone who says, well, it's a numbers game, and if I send out enough online applications, eventually I'll get an interview and I'll get an offer?
It's not a numbers game. So that really hurts my heart when I see people saying that I've applied for 100 jobs and I haven't received a single invitation for an interview. That tells me that there's something amiss. So most likely what's happening there is their resume is not targeted enough. Or they haven't taken the time to identify a target role for themselves. That is the step that needs to happen before any of the resume writing happens, before any of the job searching happens. You have to identify what you're actually going after. That's really what I think the problem is when job seekers are trying to treat job searching as a numbers game. They think that if they just apply to anything and everything, something will work itself out at some point. But a targeted job search with a targeted resume will always be a more effective job search strategy.
It's been a terrific conversation. Tell us, Kamara, what's next for you?
Yeah, so for me, I wanted to tell the listeners about a cover letter guide that I created not long ago. That is something that I think is really helpful, because cover letters can be a pretty confusing part of job searching. So I wanted to mention that that's on my website under the menu item free stuff. And my website is kamaratoffolo.com, and just look for the menu item free stuff, and then you can find my cover letter guide there.
I know in addition to your website, you also host a terrific YouTube channel, and people can learn more about you and your work by watching your YouTubes, and that URL is youtube.com, Kamara Toffolo Careers, and we'll include that in the show notes as well. Now, Kamara, given all the great advice you've shared today, what's the one thing you want a listener to remember about job search advice you need to ignore?
If the job search advice implies anything other than writing a resume that appeals to a human reader, I would get suspicious. So we always want to make sure that our resume is written towards the human reader and not written to manipulate some sort of system, because humans hire humans. And so that's ultimately what we want to make sure we're embracing, as well as adhering to make sure that we're standing out with our resumes.
Make sure you never miss an episode of Find Your Dream Job. Subscribe to our free podcast newsletter. You'll get information about our guests and transcripts of every show. Go to maxlist.org/show notes. Again, that's maxlist.org/show notes. Next week, our guest will be Sonal Bal. She's a career strategist and founder of Supercharge, a career advisory firm. She's also the host of the How I Got Hired podcast. It can be tough to return to the workplace after a long absence. Whether you've taken a break to care for family or you've been out of work through no choice of your own, you may find recruiters reluctant to talk to you. Join us next week when Sonal Bal and I talk about how to deal with long-term unemployment. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job.